I want to talk a little bit about heaven. So I talked to Matt Ridley a while back and Bjorn Lomborg, and I'm interested in their thinking because they're trying to plot an optimistic course for the future, one where at the highest levels of social integration, we decide how human society should look, at least insofar as we conceptualize how it might look if we addressed some of the major problems that beset us. But it's an attempt to make things better. It's an attempt to bring about something increasingly resembling heaven on earth. I mean, heaven is generally conceptualized. You can conceptualize it as a state of being. It might be the state of being that those people that you described live in. I've had paradisal experiences where everything transformed itself into something that was perfect, that appeared perfect. And I was unable to stay in those frames of mind. The heaven, is that something we build? Is that something? I don't understand the relationship between the heaven that awaits us, let's say, after we die. That's the idea, and what we build here on earth. Do those touch? Is that the doctrine? There's so much of this doctrine I don't understand at all.
I think a way to see it has to do with attention again, and it has to do with a hierarchy of attention. If you try to build heaven, you're going to fail. You're going to fail miserably because you're not aiming high enough, right? You're aiming, and then you get stuck in these weird world of opposites that you don't even understand the side effects of what you're doing, you know? And so for one person, heaven will look like if everything could be perfectly ordered, then, right? And then we know what that looks like. And another person will look at heaven and think if everything could be free, if we could all just be free, and then that we know what that looks like. And so the idea is to look higher. There's a story that I've been
we have to strive for something better, but then we end up in, which is what you're saying, is that we end up with the Tower of Babel, or we end up with the flood, or we end up with the catastrophe, continual catastrophe of unintended consequences. But as you yourself said, we are aiming for something better. And so the question is, how do you pursue utopia while avoiding the pitfalls? And that's a theological question, I would say.
And I think I know people are going to hate that I say this, but it has to do with worship. It has to do with what you worship. So if you worship those things that you're aiming towards, the lower things, if you worship the making a safer society, if you worship the making a freer society, if you worship making a stronger society, all of these things are going to go off the rails because they have unintended consequences that you don't understand, because they're a fragment of reality. You know, they need to be encompassed together in order to reach something higher. And so
that's the danger of ideology. It's the part takes the place of the whole.
So the idea is that if you worship God, then those other things will kind of lay themselves out slowly, and you won't be able to force them. They'll kind of lay themselves out slowly, and they'll start to manifest, progressively and as you. But you have to attend to the highest, or else, like I said, and there's an image of Antichrist which is related to this problem. In Scripture, one of the first Antichrists you could say was Judas, who betrayed Christ. Well, there's a story with Judas which is very fascinating, because Christ doesn't talk to Judas very often. But one of the places where Christ talks to Judas is when a woman comes in and wants to anoint and wash Christ's feet with a very expensive perfume. Yep. And then Judas says, what are you doing? Like, why are you doing this? Why don't we give this to the poor? Right? And Christ says, the poor will always be with you, but the bridegroom, Christ, the Messiah, is there for a short time. And
yes, so that's the other kind of story. It's very difficult to understand how anyone could have invented that story. Like, it's not the story of propagandists.
No.
In fact, it's the opposite.
Yeah. But that story has to do with attention. So Christ obviously isn't saying you shouldn't help the poor. Christ has said to help the poor. He said it many times. You have to help the poor, give to the poor, of course. But he's saying get your hierarchy in order.
And you'll help the poor more effectively
That's
that way
right.
than any other. That's the case. That is the case.
So it's like it starts with worship, and the acts that she's doing, if you look at what she's doing, first of all, she bought something expensive. She's sacrificing it. She's sacrificing it to bow down and to wash the feet, to submit, to sacrifice to, and to worship. So those three things, like when I talk about the aim, how you end up having to submit to that aim. And so this is so Christ is saying, first comes worship, then the world lays itself out below that in an appropriate way. And
that's what the Sermon on the Mount says too.
Yeah. And those that are saying help the poor as their ultimate goal, in scripture it says that Judas didn't even want to help the poor. He wanted to take the money for himself, really. Like he was a thief, actually, and he was taking the money out of the purse. And so those that just want to reduce...
Well, I suppose the truth of the matter is that the genuineness of your desire to help the poor is precisely proportional to the degree that you embody Christ.
That's right.
And it can't be otherwise. It cannot be otherwise. I see that. I see that clearly, because otherwise things will go astray.
So that's one of the problems with the modern projects of utopia, is that they're Babylesque in their attempts. And you can see like the type of gestures that the world authorities are posing in terms of safety, extreme, like, with COVID and everything, this desire to create absolute safety, this desire to create absolute identification and tracing, and all of these kind of weird gestures that show that they think they can control reality it's leading us towards a very dangerous place.